what does being non-binary, you said queer non-binary, what does that mean to you personally?
Yeah, I think I perhaps somewhat different than a lot of the other people that I met, in that I'm actually okay with the sex I was born with. Like, I don't have any sort of body dysphoria, and in some slight ways, I identify as a female. But for the most part, I just don't really believe in gender, is the thing. I think there's sex differences, but I don't believe in gender, specifically what we've assigned to different sexes. It's really crazy how meaningful a rainbow sticker or a trans pride sticker. I mean, that's also one of those things about, evaluating safety that other people might not notice. It's like, as soon as I walk into a building and I see that, like, I automatically going to feel a little bit safer. Yeah, I still have to be vigilant. It might not always be that way, but doing things to make other people feel like you are safe. And so taking some of that emotional and labor from us would be great.
Welcome to the On Air podcast. This podcast is a program of the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges Diversity Matters Initiative. The podcast explores various issues related to diversity and inclusion in the veterinary profession and provides the AAVMC an opportunity to offer ongoing diversity programming to our member institutions as well as all veterinary professionals. My name is Dr. Lisa Greenhill, and I am the Chief Organizational Health Officer here at the AAVMC. Let me just start by saying happy Pride. Happy Pride, everyone. And just remember, Pride started as a riot. So a protest riot. So always remember that. So today's episode has been in the works for quite some time, but folks are busy, and it takes us a long time to schedule these days. I had originally hoped that we would have this show. I think Trans Visibility Day, I think, is the end of March.
Mm-hmm.
And,
yeah, March 31. Yeah.
3 months later. But hey,
yeah.
now it's in Pride. So, we're still winning. So today we are going to be talking about trans and non-binary visibility in our communities. And I am delighted to welcome two guests to the show, Doctors Mo Miller and Kate Toyer. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having us, Lisa.
Absolutely. So, as is our custom on the show, I like our guests to tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about themselves before we dive into our meaty conversation. So, Kate, why don't we start with you?
Sure. My name is Kate Toyer. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a trans woman. I live on Walbunja country, Yuin Nation in Australia, which is kind of about 4 hours south of Sydney on the coast. I graduated in 1995, so last century, which ages me. But yeah, exactly. So I'm probably sort of one of the more visible out femme sort of trans femme sort of veterinarians, certainly in Australia, probably worldwide for a while. I think I'm classified as an elder now, just not because partly because I'm old and partly because I'm still here. I have a practice. I sort of have veterinary practice with my wife and long-term partner. We have like 3 children, and I also co-founded Australian Rainbow Vets and Allies, the Veterinary Kaleidoscope, which is a more sort of broader, diverse diversity advocacy organisation in Australia in the veterinary world. And I also work fairly extensively outside of the veterinary space within particularly trans advocacy in Australia. There's other stuff, Google me. Sort of it's probably the easiest. So otherwise we'll fill the podcast up with that. So I'd love to hear from Mo and and hear about your journey.
Yeah, hi. I'm Mo Miller. I use they, them pronouns. I identify as queer and gender nonconforming. I graduated from Colorado State in 2020, so a bit more recently, and I've been doing general practice small animal since then. I currently live in Denver. I just moved here about a month ago.
Well, welcome.
And yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
go ahead.
And I'm on the board of directors for Pride VMC as the student advisor.
Wonderful. Thank you both. So let's dive in. So Mo, let's start with you. What does being non-binary, you said queer non-binary, what does that mean to you personally?
Yeah, I think perhaps somewhat different than as a lot of the other people that I met, in that I'm actually okay with the sex I was born with. Like, I don't have any sort of body dysphoria, when in some slight ways I identify as a female, but for the most part, I just don't really believe in gender is the thing. I think there's sex differences, but I don't believe in gender, specifically what we've assigned to different sexes, and the societal constraints of that. So, within that, it's like gender nonconforming. I'm not going to conform to society's ideas, what it's supposed to be, who I'm supposed to act and where and love based off of the sex I was assigned at birth. And that just puts me into the, non-binary category, which I'm, more than happy to be in.
Cool. And for you, Kate, what does it mean to be a trans woman?
That's a really great question. What does it mean? I guess it means I do identify as binary female, and I did I did have a fair amount of body dysphoria associated with my previous physiology and body prior to transitioning. So I did undertake various medical interventions to bring that into line. I think that deep down there's a concept in your head. Most people have a concept in the head of like who they are, and and that matches up with how they feel about their body, and and stuff like that. There's a really good paper that was published a little while ago that talks about not just body image, but what's called body schema, which is a concept that's a little more like, if you close your eyes, you still know that you have arms and legs and and stuff, and you can still close your eyes and put your two fingers together, without actually looking at them. And that's because you have a body schema, you know where your body is in space. And for me, my body didn't feel right until my body schema matched my gender, which was different to to the body schema that I had when I was born. So that's my thing. When I first transitioned, or first started transitioning, there was a bit of non-binary thing about, and there was a bit of discussion around, a lot of it was around gender fluid identities and stuff like that. I think in the last 5 to 10 years, my understanding of non-binary identities has certainly matured as I've met more and more non-binary friends, which is probably almost reaffirmed my concept that I'm binary femme. It's not that and it's like I still feel a very strong affinity in terms of community for my MB friends and community. That concept of who I am just didn't match up. I tried it for a little while, didn't quite vibe. So
Yeah, thanks for that. So it's I think that there is, despite a lot more public discourse and available kind of information, people are still really struggle with well, what does this mean? And I'm reminded that I was traveling with my daughter probably over 10 years ago, and we were at an airport really early in the morning. An individual had won Eurovision. They had a beard, also had an amazing dress. I mean, bag, just fly, right? My daughter was like, okay, so what's going on right here? And she did not have an inside voice. So I was educating everybody at the gate that day at 5:30 in the morning. And I was like, I need to come up with a really good explanation. And for me, it ended up being a lot easier than I thought. And I just said, their insides don't They don't feel like their insides match their outsides, right? I
I
like in the
think
sense that there's this kind of identity piece where it's like this body, the alignment is not aligned. The aligning is not aligning, you know? And
And
so,
there's a definite I think there's a really definite societal thing as well. And I'm sort of just to catch back to you there, Mo, on sort of in terms of like the societal definition of gender, like sort of where that comes from. And certainly one of the really interesting spaces I find is that when I go to, I'd like be interested in hearing your sort of view on this, Mo, and also Lisa, if you've sort of been in these spaces. But when you go to a trans or gender diverse event, like sort of a party, sort of whatever it is, where it's just everyone's trans and gender diverse, and it is like all of those assumptions are kind of thrown out the window, and
Mhm.
there's an element of liberation about that, and I think sort of it's a lovely feeling, sort of, and I think an interesting space to be in. Sort of, is that sort of how do you feel about it, Mo?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as we're talking about this, it's obvious, like Kate and I's identities are different, but we still fall under the same umbrella, showing that it can mean whatever you want it to mean. And if you go into that party, if you talk to everybody's journey, it's going to look a little different. And some of that is, I don't feel like I'm in the right body. Some of that is, I don't believe in society's constructs. And in some aspects I have a little bit of both. But yeah, certainly I love being in gender queer spaces where all pretenses are not there. And while I feel safe in queer spaces and heightened sense of safety when I'm in a gender queer specific space, because I don't have to answer any questions about who I am. I just get to be who I am.
oh, I love that. And that really kind of gets to the central point of our discussion today about visibility. And so how important is that? I'm going to assume for both of you, it's super important, but if you could talk a little bit about, why it's so important, kind of building Mo on that. Hey, I just get to actually exist in this space. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with visibility, it's difficult to answer that because I think everyone else's journey with that is different as well, because there are some,
Sure.
What is visibility, right?
Yeah.
Do I want to be seen as X, Y, and Z, or do I want to, if I am trans, do I want to not be seen
Yeah.
because I don't like is who I am, and so I don't have to be trans in this situation. But I think it's, if we're talking on a greater scale, visibility is more visibility of identities, and just having these conversations and, being open to exploring what that means for yourself. And, there's times where it's difficult, but I always, walk into a space assuming people are gonna know that I'm not, some society mold person. And that's how I like to be. And I like it. I can definitely sense when I have clients that are also queer, there's people feel a little safer because it's a kind of a trauma that we've all gone through, in a sense of like community as well.
Yeah. Thanks for reframing that in terms of less about what it means for you, but what is it, right? Well, how does visibility kind of show up for you, or what does it mean for you? Because not everybody wants to be visible, not everybody needs to be visible, right? And kind of like
Yeah.
what is the narrative around fundamentally around visibility, right? If
Mm-hmm.
so Kate, that's a whole
It's
like put
a
question in there
it's a
somewhere.
real, yeah, like it's a really, there's so much depth in this, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think that and we were sort of my wife and I we're just having this discussion because even though like I'm sort of binary femme. And I could probably, like, if I really wanted to, I could pass and go stealth. If listeners don't know, stealth is a term that's used in community for when you kind of slip into like normal society and are accepted as your identified gender, without anyone knowing you're trans. It's not a space that I would feel comfortable in. And my wife and I were having this discussion because I'm fairly active in political advocacy and activism in Australia. And we recently in New South Wales just passed our birth certificate reform laws so that you can now change your gender marker on your birth certificate to reflect your sort of true gender rather than your sex assigned at birth. So, and it's an interesting, because I was asked to do some sort of promotional stuff around this, which was fun. But almost all of it's a funny thing because on a practical level, all of my documents identify me as female: passport, driver's license, every legal document realistically associated with me, apart from that one piece of paper that birth certificate, that birth registration, identifies me as female. And realistically, birth certificates are not used for a huge amount here in Australia. That's another discussion entirely in America, but we're sort of putting that one aside for a moment. We'll park that for a second. But in Australia, certainly, birth certificates, like once you have passports and driver's licenses, they're not really used at all. And yet it's still really important for me. Like in a similar way, it's important for me to actually be visible in the general community, as being trans. And I think that there's sometimes tension within community about about visibility. Like there are people who who are like, no, everyone should be visible because otherwise how are we ever going to be accepted? And there's discussions around that. And I think there's no easy answer to those. I think they're sort of nuanced dialogues that really need to do need to keep on going on. For me, it has been about, because I was realistically one of the only, particularly when I first transitioned, one of the only trans femme veterinarians out there. Like it was important within the veterinary community for me to be visible. So that other trans identifying veterinarians could actually go, oh shit, actually it's kind of possible. Like you can do that, which was something I didn't really have growing up. So yeah, like it's and then like what's that visibility versus visibility in the general public, and my visibility does vary depending on the spaces I'm in. I'm guessing that that's probably similar for you, Mo, probably less so for yourself, Lisa, where your visibility as a Black woman is like it's there, like it doesn't matter, like you're in the room. But I can kind of turn up in parliamentary inquiries and put on the dress and the makeup and appear to be just like any other cis femme woman who's in there, and then drop the truth bomb of like, I'm trans, but it kind of gets my foot in the door. So yeah, interesting and complicated space to explore.
Yeah, thanks to both of you, because it is a different way of kind of thinking about visibility in terms, it's very nuanced, right? It's kind of where, when, how, what levers will you pull or push, what buttons will you push or not, what is the space, I would say that it is not, it's very much like all marginalized groups in the sense that you read the room and figure out what you're gonna do. Right?
Yeah.
Like code switching.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a code switch element here, right? Like, okay, so am I gonna amplify this part? Am I gonna turn down that part? And some of those things have to do with safety. Some of those things have to do with comfort that is different from safety. Because like safety is one thing, and then comfort is another, is a different a scale for me anyway. And what language you choose to use, and how do you do you want to fit in and move through the crowd, or do you want to be in front of the crowd, if you will, right?
I think it's it's an interesting concept, the difference between comfort and safety, because I strongly advocate, I think to most people, most of my trans sort of friends and younger sort of mentees, sort of say, look, make sure you are safe first and foremost. Like that's absolutely essential. Like you need to make sure you're safe. Comfort's a different one, isn't it? Because it is sort of like, I think as long as you're safe, you can probably push your comfort levels and sort of go, okay, I'm safe. I have the power and the privilege. How am I going to use that power and privilege to push my comfort and potentially, hopefully, help someone else be able to be more safe, and stuff like that. And like I'm wild on like like I'm the one like that's literally leading the rallies and and up there with the microphone, sort of leading the chants, doing doing the protest rallies and stuff. Partly because I have privilege, I have power, like I'm old, I have money, I'm white, I'm cis passing at times if I really need to be. So I have all these all of these power and privilege things that mean that I can push my comfort into a space that hopefully benefits others.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Lisa, before we, I want to keep going through some of the questions, but I know this reaches a wide audience. Do you mind if we just give a quick rundown of these terms that we've been using? Because people might not know.
Sure.
So just to start out, sex is something that's assigned at birth, often based off genetic codes. And when it's assigned at birth, it's typically based off of like external genitalia. And historically, it's been sorted into a binary, which is male and female. There are intersex people that genetics and anatomy don't always match what we would consider typical. So being somebody that identifies their gender, which is a societal construct of an identity of yourself, and so being cisgendered would be meaning you're assigned sex at female, you identify as a female. Being trans would be the opposite of such. And then being non-binary believes that those two, just being within male and female, doesn't exist in whatever spectrum that is. These are just basic terms. There's so much we could dive into, but I just, want to make sure people know what we're talking about when we say cis, because I don't think everyone does.
Thank you for that. Yeah. As a person that's taken many, many years of Latin, we need more Latin prefixes. No, people need to learn more Latin prefixes. So thank you for that, Mo. So what is the, is there, and I'm going to assume, some was part of your answers anyway, but what about the emotional labor of choosing to be visible, particularly in the sense of, we know that particularly in the US right now, but certainly globally, not just in the US, but I'll be blunt, it's dangerous out here. I worry about folks. It's dangerous, it's scary.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of emotional labor that we all go through every day, and that can be small or large. We can look at the emotional labor of feeling safe in that any space that I walk into, I have to do that evaluation. Am I safe? That's not something I think, cis heterosexual people necessarily have to think about. And I mean, very much so now. So it's not just, am I safe from being beaten up or called a name? Am I legal to be here? And will law enforcement get involved, which is, terrifying. And that's not something I used to be that worried about. But then there's, so there's the safety aspect, and then there's like micro trauma aspects of It's hard to explain the emotional labor of pronouns because I have had, some cis people, especially cis heterosexual people, when I'm saying you're messing up my pronouns, is harmful and hurtful. They're like, well, somebody's called me X before and the wrong, and they think of it as something funny. It happens to them 5 times in their life, but every single time I go outside as a non-binary person, I'm going to be misgendered. I'm called she or honey or madam, whatever it might be, constantly. And it just, every time I hear it, even though I know my own identity, every time I hear it, I feel like a sharp little pain, like it's the death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's every single day, and you have to kind of just remain resilient in that. And there's definitely been times where I was like, well, because I don't have like bad body dysmorphia, should I just continue being she? But it just doesn't feel like authentic. And so there's, and I think every identity will have different emotional labors, but those are things that are, on a daily occurrence for me. There's all sorts of other little things. Bathrooms are a really big problem as well.
Yeah.
And I can go into that in detail if you want as well.
Yeah, I mean, feel free. But yeah, I mean, I think that there are lots of things that cis people take for granted, right? Because it is a position of privilege, and oftentimes we've got the blinders on, right? And I think that it's particularly hard sometimes for other marginalized groups to accept that there is a privilege around that, because oftentimes we all just kind of hunker down in our identities and kind of are very aware of our lived experience, but the ability to stretch for all of us can be challenging. And trying to lead with empathy, right? But it's the pronoun piece is, I tell people all the time, it's kind of like, when someone has a air quote foreign, difficult to pronounce name, and it's like, well, can I just call you Janet? Can I just call you Ted, right? Do I have to do that? And I'm like, okay, but we're also in a medical discipline, and you learned a 5-syllable word. We can do this. And it's not hard.
And I think it also, and sort of by sort of going, can I just call you Janet or can I just call you Ted? It ignores the beauty that actually exists within that sort of within that diversity of that name. I mean, sort of the names are names, and people choose names because they identify with them, but sometimes they're chosen for them by parents because they're beautiful. Like sort of they just sound lovely. And sort of why would you? To me, it doesn't make sense. Why would you deny yourself that beauty of being able to actually to know someone's true name, and sort of and go, oh no, that's sort of I don't like that kind of beauty. I'm just going to ignore that and just go with fucking vanilla. Sorry, excuse the language, my bad. Sort of, I'm going to go with the vanilla flavor. So I think that. And that's a disservice to everyone. Like, sort of, it's a disservice to the people who are sort of like, oh no, that's a bit complicated. Like, sort of explore. Like, sort of, I think you'd be a little surprised about what you find. I think sort of back to the emotional labor and the pronouns a little bit there, Mo. I think sort of I was having a little think about this just sort of just yesterday, and I think one of the challenges that I've had and sort of and do have, and I'm not going to lie, like sort of I love being trans. Don't get me wrong. Sort of like I love myself. This is my best. This is my best. Who I am. This is my best body. This is my best sort of existence. And it doesn't mean it's easy. And I think that what was talking the other day again with myself and my wife, and we're talking about prior to transition, there was like society was quite happy with me. Like that was sort of like, oh yeah, no, that's simple. Like you're sort of you're in that little box. But I was constantly fighting with myself because it was like the way society saw me versus who I was inside, like just did not match up. Sort of
Yeah.
after transition, unfortunately, the sort of that internal fight I was able to resolve. Unfortunately, it's
Mhm.
flipped to an external conflict. So
Yeah.
now I'm fighting society to actually recognize it. And this is where pronouns sort of really come into it because there's such a societal recognition of who we are, and particularly associated with gender. And when people don't get your pronouns right, it's just I've got to do the fight again. Like they just don't even see me. They don't even recognize. They don't
Right.
acknowledge the beauty of who I am. And and I think that sort of that emotional labor is quite marked and
Yeah.
significant.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I agree. Like not being called the right pronouns or the right name, it makes you feel like your identity doesn't exist and that you
Mm.
don't have a space in our current society. And yeah, you're completely right. That internal battle does switch to external, and I don't know what's harder. Probably internal, but
Yeah.
Mm.
Honestly, after 10 years of the external and sort of 40 years of the internal, I'm not sure either.
yeah.
Sort of, I think that I don't hate like sort of, hate's a harsh word. I never really hated myself, but at least I feel happy and joyful in myself. And when I can
Right.
genuinely find truly joyful sort of spaces like those spaces where you are just truly accepted. And they're not always transgender first. Like I have a lot of cisgender friends sort of
Mhm.
who fully accept me into that space. The emotional labor is marked and significant though, like sort of, and like, and I don't think I need to tell you, like, so like sort of one of the stories I tell people is sort of, particularly, I think cisgendered white people sort of don't tend to get this quite so much, but literally every time I go into a pub or a bar, I can within about 20 seconds tell you where all of the exits are, how many of the bar staff are female, where's a safe place for me to sit, where are the toilets, sort of, and which group of people in that bar are most likely to potentially sort of
Yeah.
assault me or
Mhm.
abuse me. And literally within 20 seconds, and all of that information just enters my head.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
just there.
It just is there.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
You're
just
bringing
is
that up.
there. Sort of.
Yeah. That hypervigilance that is just
Mm,
always there, right? It's
Right.
like
yeah.
your securities check, like really quickly, like, okay, so if things go left, like, how do I
Mm,
get out of here? How do I
yeah.
stay safe? How
Right.
do I, like, I'm scanning the crowd. Okay, like, are there signs that
Mm,
indicate whether or not this is a safe place or not, right? And that's not just the exits. It's right
Right.
down to the t-shirts that people have on and the tattoos that they
mm,
have. Are they
Yeah.
visible?
yeah.
And what do they tell? What information do they tell you? There is a hypervigilance I know you experience, and I think lots of marginalized, visibly marginalized people will experience. That's really challenging and exhausting.
Right. It
Mm,
is. Yeah. I mean, who wants to be hyper vigilant?
Right,
Everywhere. You
right.
can't turn it off because, well, being safe is important.
Being safe
And
is
it's
critical.
also, you know, further than that is every identity has different things that they're checking and scanning as well. And so I imagine with people with intersection, it's even, you got a lot of things to think about. um, I have like chronic migraines that are really triggered by light. So if I walk into a building, I will know within 1 second what's going on with the lighting, and I'll tell someone, and they're like, I didn't notice. And it's just like these things we just don't think about because we're all a
Yeah,
little selfish.
yeah,
But it's also because it's our lived experience. So if you don't know to look out for something, you're not forced to. you're probably
Yeah.
not going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
think
go ahead.
the hypervigilance, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I think the hypervigilance makes you tired. And there's also an emotional labor of, I don't know how you feel about this, Mo, but certainly I get this, I feel this a lot. There's an emotional labor of having to be the representative. Like you sort of, particularly if you're sort of going to be the visible person, sort of, and I know that you experience this a lot, Lisa, sort of, is that you have to be the polite one. You have to sort of, you have to be outrageously informed, like phenomenally informed and researched on sort of on anything you talk about. You have to be ridiculously patient, and if you're not patient, if you get upset and annoyed, then suddenly you're like you're the bitch in the room, and
Right.
and it's like, and that's another like really massive that's a big emotional labor I find for me, because I just don't, there's never a time certainly within the constructs of my professional life, where I really and truly get to relax. Like it's sort of, I
Right.
just sort of, it's constantly on.
Yeah. I had a thought. It's blanking on me. I'll come back to it.
Okay. So, one of the things that I know that queer people in general, but also and especially trans and non-binary folks also kind of have to grapple with are the questions, right? And the questions, the inappropriate questions. And I often think that the questions are not intended to be malicious. People are genuinely like, well, how does this all work? Right? Right? Like, how does this all work? But also like they're still inappropriate oftentimes, where they're framed in a way that's like, so tell me your deepest, darkest medical history so that I can understand, right? So tell me, and I'm gonna frame this in I guess maybe a more positive way. People are gonna ask questions and give people parameters here, like don't ask me about this. Now, first of all, we can all say, don't ask me about this, just accept what is. But the world doesn't work like that, sadly. So like give people some parameters, like, hey, don't do this. That's super rude.
Right. I think one of the things with these questions is, I hate having to explain constantly what is a they them pronoun, and that it can be used as a singular as well as a plural. And I think right now we're in the United States, but I think worldwide we are kind of facing this wide gap of information and knowledge. And some of the older generation people that I know are like, let's just reach across this table, let's accept each other's differences. And it's like, well, why don't you do a little tiny bit of research on your own, take some responsibility in this information, because I just don't want to explain to every person I meet what non-binary means. You can Google that. It might, it looks different for everybody, and once you get to know someone, you can ask some more details of, I've had people ask me that are my friends, what does that experience look like for you? But I don't want a stranger to have to explain it to a stranger. I mean, I think for me, the only question that, if we're talking about complete strangers, that's appropriate really is, what are your pronouns? You don't need to know any more information about what's my name and what's my pronouns to just be respectful.
Yeah.
And if I get to know you, if I'm working with you, if we're going to be in closer quarters, maybe some of those further questions can be asked. But I think I'm not asking who you're sleeping with, how you're sleeping with them, who's, God, I mean, the man in the relation. It's just like, what? I didn't ask you any of that, and it would be completely inappropriate for me to do so. So I don't know why people think it's appropriate to ever ask questions about that. That's a little bit more on orientation than gender, but it's like, oh, so weird.
Yeah, I've pretty much had all the questions, sort of pretty well all of them over time.
Tell us
I
how you
think
smack their
that
hands away, Kate.
Oh, sort
Bad
of,
question.
to be honest, sometimes I don't even know. Like, sort of, some guy be hitting on me, and I'm just like oblivious because I just thought he was like a nice guy, and it's just like sort of, my wife's like, that guy's hitting on you. I'm like, oh, oh. But it's sort of, I think it depends a little bit on context to an extent, and I'd sort of, and certainly, I think that every trans person has the ability and sort of and the right to actually talk about their journey if they wish to do so. I'm not particularly private about sort of, I'm reasonably open about sort of what medical interventions I've had when it comes down to it. I think though, when someone comes up to you and is sort of and is asking you fairly sort of fairly private, intimate questions, it is a little bit like, and this is, I take the cue from some of my neurodivergent friends. I don't identify as neurodivergent, but sort of I've got a lot of friends who are neurodivergent, big intersection with neurodivergence and queer and sort of trans, obviously, and it's just like, to a certain extent, I also feel like saying, okay, if you're interested in me sexually, would you just mind actually saying so? And then we can have a discussion around how that works. But sort of, but if you just sort of kind of, if you really just sort of after like gossip, yeah, sort of, and trust me, if I'm interested in you sexually, I'll tell you. Like, sort of, it's not highly likely, trust me, but it's sort of, but I will tell you, and I'll make that pretty explicit and clear. So, in a respectful way, and I think that sort of you touched on that word respect, Mo, and respect, I think, is the really critical sort of element in terms of applying respect. And also, sometimes it's kind of nice to talk about shit that isn't trans. Like, sort of, in some ways, trans is slightly sort of, in a lot of respects, it's one of the least interesting things about me. Like, sort of, certainly the thing I've done, sort of, I mean, sort of, I'm actually a pretty decent veterinary surgeon. Like, sort of, I cut sort of TPLOs, fracture repairs and whatnot all the time. Sort of, I'm actually not a bad surgeon. No one ever asked me about that shit. And, I sort of, I play musical instruments. I love poetry. I think that sort of, I think that storytelling and myths and the way we perceive the world and what we think beauty is a fascinating place to actually explore. And it's like, talk to me about that. Like, sort of, realistically, like, if you want to talk to me and you sort of, and you actually, and you want to engage with me, talk to me about that stuff. Don't talk to me about like sort of, what was it like to transition? Sort of, like, to sort of, whatever it is. And sort of, because it's just like, I've kind of answered this 1,000 times, like, and it's now just getting really boring. It's really to sort of to someone else.
Yeah.
So,
Big bad.
yeah.
So
I
in
think
summary, Mo said, you can ask me about my pronouns, otherwise kind of, mind your business.
Yeah.
Kate is like, you should ask me about the beauty of the world and all these other hobbies I have. But if you're trying to like, flirt, then like I'm gonna need you to ask better questions. Is that
Yeah,
what I'm taking away?
exactly. Work on your
I
flirting game, all right?
the only time where, sometimes I wear different hats. And when I'm in my more activist role
Yeah.
and representing Pride, either, giving a lecture or just even simply being at the booth, I might be more willing to answer those questions, because that's the lens that we're looking at right now. And I want to be an activist, and I'm very proud of my identity, and I have no shame in it. And, in some ways, I'd rather you ask me than someone that might be struggling, because I feel confident in it. But when I'm just, anywhere, why you don't need to know.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I didn't ask you what your experience of being female is. it's
Yeah.
just not relevant.
Weird questions. They're
Yeah.
just weird.
Yeah, it's like it's really weird. Like it almost gets to the bathroom thing. It's like what on earth do you do in the bathroom, cis people?
Right.
Like it's weird. Go to the toilet, wash your hands, get out.
Yeah.
Like it's sort of
Yeah. It's yeah, the whole bathroom thing has always been kind of bananas to me. I'm like, just do your yeah. Anyway,
yeah.
but so as we start to wrap up, what would you like your colleagues to know about this experience, and what are your expectations of your colleagues in this experience?
I mean, I do feel like, we do all, including myself, need to be better about asking and leading with pronouns. It's hard though. I keep being like, that's the first thing I'm going to say to owners when I walk into a room, and then I get nervous about it. But, with the pronouns as well, it can be such a burden to have to correct someone all the time. And I would love if more of my friends who know me, took on some of that burden of correction, because I just get over it. And I sometimes correct people, but for the most part, it's just like, I don't want to have to go through this. So taking some of that emotional burden for people, leading with your own pronouns, even if you do identify as cisgendered, and having those visible, working on creating safety if you're owning your own vet clinic or wherever, by having something like a gender neutral bathroom. So making some effort to think about these different identities and how we can make them feel a little bit more safe. And I mean, in any conversation we have about what can allies do, especially in the vet community, it's really crazy how meaningful a rainbow is, a rainbow sticker or a trans pride sticker. I mean, that's also one of those things about evaluating safety that other people might not notice. It's like, as soon as I walk into a building and I see that, like, I automatically am going to feel a little bit safer. Yeah, I still have to be vigilant. It might not always be that way, but doing things to make other people feel like you are safe. And so taking some of that emotional and labor from us would be great.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Definitely the trans pride sort of flagged for me. Like sort of any time you see those colors, it's like that's a real sort of standout. What would I like my colleagues to sort of take away? I think the big thing for me I'd like my colleagues to take away is just go and love a trans person, because I think sort of and I don't mean romantic love, although if you fall in love romantically with a trans person, go for it, like sort of genuinely, sort of because they're fucking gorgeous, but I mean friendship love and all those sorts of types of things, because they are just, the trans people I know are incredibly amazing, like sort of the youth, the elders, the sort of the like my trans girlfriends that I work with or do sort of do activities or are just bloody friends with, sort of the trans guys like sort of that I know, sort of my MB friends. Oh my goodness, aren't some MB guys super hot? But sort of that aside, sort of it's like, love a trans person, because if you have a trans person, we know that when you have a trans person in your life and you start exploring and start learning about our communities, that you will basically sort of that it will enrich your life, and you'll see that we aren't, it's not sort of it's not about bathrooms, it's not about sort of definitions in law or any sort of stuff like that. It's just a person, like it's just about a person.
Right.
and I think that's sort of I hope our colleagues can sort of go, wow, they're just people. They're people that have to do a lot of fighting that sort of to actually get people to get society to recognize them as people, but they're really just people that sort of isn't that kind of the most interesting and exciting thing about the world, isn't it? All the sort of, I mean, apart from all of the biology and the diversity and sort of and animals and stuff, sort of, but exploring sort of people and people's stories. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, off your point of, knowing and loving a trans person, I would say it is possible no matter where you are. But if you just don't know anyone, reading books written by trans people, watching shows written by trans people, or movies, not some of this stuff that, I don't know, some cis het person makes about this identity to try to get some award. There are plenty of things that are made by, people that explore all the beauties of being trans. And it doesn't even always have to be about what does it mean to be trans. It is just about a person. And that's not the main part. It's about a person's journey and life experiences. So, using media too, I think would be, because if you know more about people, then you're gonna feel like you can accept them better, or I don't know. I think that's important.
Yeah, I agree, Mo. I think that's sort of although I think most people will probably sort of be surprised at how many trans people are actually around them.
Yes,
they just don't realize it. But definitely our stories sort of and the intersectional stories of Black trans women in particular, that sort of but all of those sorts of things. And I've got a very dear friend who's deaf and introduced me to sort of some of the deaf community, and just exploring that community, sort of the disability community, and like sort of explore it, read about it, but yes, definitely. So as Mo, sort of as you sort of said there, please try and get the stories that are written and the experiences sort of from trans people. And I'm not just talking biographies, I'm talking fiction as well. Tori Peters is sort of is a great author, sort of who's American. There's plenty of other sort of trans and non-binary sort of authors in the US that sort of write fiction too, because sometimes the fiction can be really interesting and pretty wild once you throw out gender binaries and you throw out the standard rom-com. Sort of you get kind of it can get a really interesting exploration. So
awesome. Well, thank you. I think this is a great part to wrap up on. I love this notion of just loving a trans or non-binary person, loving people, right? And to the looking at art, reading books, there's a wonderful new bio out on Marsha P. Johnson that just came out last month. I've already got it queued up in my Audible. I just need to find some time to get off a plane and read it. But it's called The Joy and Defiance of Marsha P. Johnson, and it was written by transgender artist Tourmaline. So check it out. Just came out last month. Fresh, hot take. And Mo, I'm also going to co-sign that Google is free. And folks that know me really well on social media, whenever I post, here is your quarterly reminder that Google is free. Yes, I'm open to answering questions about diversity, but a lot of the questions that I get are like DEI 101, and I promise you Beyonce's internet can answer that for you.
Right. Yeah, and if we're talking about Google is free, resources, I'm just going to give kind of two shout outs. One, on Pride VMC's website, we have a whole bunch of resources that we have vetted that have accurate, good information. And then also just getting a certification. I mean, AVMA has Brave Space. You can do Purdue's Certificate of Diversity. Doing something like that, taking that extra step to not just Google, but to really take a course to increase your understanding too. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Sort of, and go follow trans and non-binary sort of for creatives and Black creatives and disabled creatives and neurodivergent creatives.
Yeah.
Because like the world's wild and diverse and beautiful. And if you're not sort of exploring that, why are you here?
Right.
Yeah. What are you doing with your life? No, Well, thank you, both of you, for taking time to chat with me today. I really, really appreciate the time that you're spending with me, and this conversation has been wonderfully rich. And again, for folks that are curious, please think about the experiences that folks have shared today, because they echo. Right? They echo through many different types of lived experiences, and we actually do have a lot more in common than we do, than we don't. And so, to each of you, thank you incredibly so much from the depths of my heart. And happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes,
Bye,
thank
everyone.
you so much. This has been another episode of AAVMC's On Air podcast. Please be sure to like and subscribe this episode and go back into our deep catalog. We've got 9 years worth of content there, and always creating more. So, and to my guest, Mo, and to Kate, again, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, and morning. Thanks.